Is there anybody here that can testify? That may not be your testimony, but somebody may testify you didn't even know how you were going to get to work. You woke up and found that your car was on E, and you didn't have a dime for gas. You drove to work anyhow, and then you drove back home. And then the next morning, you still didn't have any money, but you drove to work anyhow, and you drove back home. And you got confident and figured if God can do it once and twice, that he's able to do it again. And so with your confident self, you got back in the car and drove back to the job, and you made it all the way there. And when you got there, the car broke down, but you realized that there was a co-worker there who owed you some money from back, but you ain't saying nothing here, who owed you some money from months ago, and you were able, God has a way of delivering it himself. Yes, God has riches that are untold. If you're sick, he's a doctor. If you're lonely, he's a company keeper. If you're happy, he can still give you joy. If you're struggling, he'll help you over your mountain. If you're troubled, he'll be a problem solver. If you're in a financial problem, he's a banker without banker hours. And he'll find you wherever you are, and he'll answer you wherever your place of need is. And you can talk to him in a building miles away, and he'll heal your family member on their bed of affliction. He can hear you in 1500 South 8th Street, and he can work it out on 1 Cooper Plaza. He can hear you on 1500 and move downtown. He can hear you on 1500 and straighten it out in Voorhees. He can hear you at 1500, and he can change it in your situation. He can hear you at 1500, and he can prepare a way on the freeway. God has a way of meeting you at the point of your needs. Secondly, God, he grants requests. Watch this. He grants requests with wisdom. Y'all missed that tonight. Before you go run out and go to 7-Eleven and say, the Lord bless me, my 6th lottery number. The Lord bless me to find $1 million on the street on my way home. You need to hear this, that God grants requests with wisdom. I don't recall Jabez asking the Lord for long life. He didn't even ask the Lord to not allow diseases to come near him. He didn't petition the Lord for a house on the hill. He asked requests that fell within the perimeters of the wall of the Lord. In other words, God is apt to answer prayers that are aligned with his will and not ours. Look at the 4 components of his prayer. The first thing he says that God would bless me. And secondly, he says that God would enlarge my territory. And thirdly, that God would extend his hand towards me. And fourthly, he says that God will keep me from evil. These are the things that fall within the parameter of his will. That God will answer these prayers because, watch this, they do not conflict with his will. And the problem why some of us are crying over unanswered prayers is because our prayers conflict with the wills of God. Can I help some of us in here? We praying, Lord, kill my co-worker. That's not God's will. Lord, beat up on my neighbor. That's not his will. Lord, help me not to cuss out the church member. That's not his will. God is saying whenever you pray, you got to pray within his. Even Jesus himself knew how to pray within the will. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he says, Lord, if it be thy will, let this cup pass. He knew he was even in a situation, and as long as he prayed within the will of God, that God will bring him through. And even if God didn't bring him out of it, he will bring him through. Am I talking to anybody in here that there's some stuff that you got to learn how to pray in the will of God? And even if God don't bring you out of it, God will give you peace in the midst of what you're going through. Am I talking to anybody here that says God didn't remove the pain, but he gave gave me peace in the midst of the pain. God didn't move the frustration, but he let me sleep in the midst of my night, woke me up with a smile on my face. God, it's not all the time I need you to remove it from me, but God, if you allow me to just get through it. Do I have about 5 folks in the building that says, God, if you just let me get through this one thing, God, I promise to bless your name if you let me get through it. His will is at stake. And not only his will is at stake, but anything you ask God for, the end result has to be that he will be glorified. If you praying to get the glory out of it, your prayers will never get answered. But whenever you're praying, that God gets the glory out of it. Anything you ask the Lord, the end result must be that he gets the glory. That I get blessed, not so that I can get a bigger bank account, but I get blessed that God gets the glory. I get my territory enlarged, not so that I can brag on my personal bigness, but that God gets the glory. I feel his hand, not so that I can have a cold chill down my spine every now and then, but that God gets the glory. I get kept from evil, not so that I can tell others, I'm holier than you are, but I get kept from evil so that God can get the glory. And that's how his will works in our lives. His will generates a view to his glory. And when you look at God and what God has done for us at this point in your life, David, he said in his word that he sits on the throne of Israel. And he didn't get there on his own educational merit, but God called him a shepherd's field. And when he arrives in the king's palace, he writes the words, "The Lord is my shepherd." Israel is delivered from the hands of Pharaoh and his armies, not because they own weapons of mass destruction, but because God allows the enemy to be swallowed up. And when the enemy is defeated, he writes a song for the occasion that says, "Oh, God is a man of war. Pharaoh's chariot and his riders, God has thrown them into the sea. Jesus himself is affixed to the rugged cross, and his disciples have fled into a yonder country. It looks like all hope is gone, that life oozes from his body when he dies, and the world reels in rock. And time has become divided from BC to AD, and the centurion elevates it and says, truly, this must have been the Son of God." And somebody here today, that God has done something for you. That God here today has made a way for you. That somebody here has become victorious and not the victim. That you have made it through broken marriage. That you have made it through hard-headed children. That you made it on food stamps and hand-me-downs. That you made it through broken hearts and broken promises. That you made it through tuna fish sandwich and biscuits and syrup. That you made it through clotheslines and shrub boards. That you made it through hair grease that became skin lotion and shoe polish. That you made it through trials and tribulation. That you made it from being broke, busted, and disgusted. But you had enough sense to pray even in the midst of what you're going through. But am I talking to about 5 folks in the building that says, I didn't pray for God to elevate me to another place. If he does it, to God be the glory. But the reason that I pray and the reason I seek the face of God is so that God can get the glory out of my life. And is there anybody who can look at your life and say, Lord, I thank you for enlarging my territory. Lord, I thank you for keeping me from the hand of the enemy. Lord, I thank you that I didn't get swallowed up in my sins. But now that you have blessed me, now that you have put your hands on me, now that you have brought me to another plateau, I take no credit for it. But I say to God be the glory, for the great things he has done. And is there anybody in the house that know that the glory does not belong to you, but the glory belongs to God? Is there anybody here that says the glory does not belong to me, but it all belongs to him? That when you look at me now, I'm just a fragment of the glory of God. If you look at me now, if you see me from where I came from, it was no goodness of my own, but it's like the scripture says, if it had not been for the Lord who was on my side. I wish I had a witness in the building that can say, if it had not been for the Lord who was on my side, and because he kept me, I said, because he kept me, I got a testimony, as the songwriters say, through it all, I've learned to trust in Jesus. Through it all, I've learned to trust in God. Through it all, I've learned how to depend upon his word. Is there anybody here that can testify that you still got a reachable praise and a reachable prayer, a prayer that gets to the throne room of God, a prayer that breaks up the enemy territory, a prayer that makes the enemy stop in his tracks? I dare somebody to look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, when I pray, things begin to change. When I pray, my children come back home. When I pray, the city begins to change. When I pray, drug addicts gotta put down the needle. When I pray, alcoholics gotta put down the Bible. For I heard the Bible say, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray, seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, forgive their sins, heal the land. I dare somebody to lift their hands and tell the Lord, Lord, hear my prayer. In the midnight hour, hear my prayer. When I'm on my job, hear my prayer. When I'm driving up and down the highway, hear my prayer. Hear my prayer, oh Lord, and attend unto my concerns. Say yes, say yes, say yes.